Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, Using AI to Evaluate VPATs. This webinar is made available by the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group. Northwest HEAT is a joint project of the Orbis Cascade Alliance and NWAC, the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium. Our mission at Northwest HEAT is to advance our common goal of ensuring that digital services, systems, and resources are equitably accessible to all users. Our overarching goal is to cultivate a community of practice among faculty and staff who support digital accessibility on their campuses. To do this, we provide a series of professional development opportunities, such as this webinar, and we share best practices and resources through a collaborative knowledge base. If you'd like more information about the work of Northwest HEAT, we invite you to visit northwestheat.org. You can also communicate with us through the poll that we will share at the end of this session. Before we introduce our presenters, we'll take a moment to share some housekeeping details. This session includes a chat, which means you can submit questions to our presenters throughout the session. This session includes captioning. You will find instructions on how to access captioning in our Zoom chat. This session is being recorded, and the video will be shared on this event's page at northwestheat.org. Our presenters for using AI to evaluate VPATs are Kevin Corcoran and Rebecca McNulty from the University of Central Florida. And now we'll turn it over to Kevin and Rebecca for your presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. Rebecca, feel free to share the slides. As was mentioned, we represent the University of Florida, located here in Orlando, Florida. Just a little bit of context for us. We are an R1 institution, and we have a student headcount of 70,000 students. We have been immersed in online learning for over 30 years now, and accessibility has been at the forefront of much of the work that we've done. Rebecca, if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about context here. So specifically, Rebecca and I work within our division of digital learning that has a rather large footprint. We have about 10,000 students that are exclusively online, but of our 70,000 students, there's about 86% that are taking online classes in some form or fashion. So we have to be accessible prior to the legislation that we're all racing towards anyway, just because of the large footprint that we have at the university. So within the last couple of years, our Vice Provost has challenged us to really explore all the utility that generative AI can present, and not only looking at ways that we can innovate, but also looking for operational efficiencies. So in the context of accessibility, one of the largest challenges we see is with the procurement process and validating whether or not a platform or a software tool meets accessibility. And quite frankly, when most folks look at that, they're looking at a completed VPAT, and unless you're trained and skilled to look at those are very difficult to evaluate and analyze and interpret what the vendor is providing. So within the UCF context, which is no different than many institutions, procurement is sort of a diversified approach. It doesn't just reside within finance or within IT, and no one owns the accessibility review. So with having a diversified or decentralized procurement process with no one really owning the accessibility review, we thought that we would take the generative AI experiences that we had and put it into use to address a specific problem at UCF around putting the VPAT in plain English so that a faculty member, an administrative assistant, a staff member could read through, identify what the issues that may be presenting, and look at what the real disability impact that those deficiencies may have. So what we'd like to do is talk a little bit more about the VPAT, the complexities that we're facing, and then show the tool that we've made available to the nation at no cost. So Rebecca, please take it on.
Absolutely. So thank you, Kevin. My name is Rebecca McNulty. I'm an instructional designer at the University of Central Florida, and I'm one of the people in the seat who Kevin was mentioning, who, if presented with the technical documentation before we started this project, I wouldn't necessarily have had the skills or training to interpret exactly what a VPAT is telling me. So first question, what is a VPAT or an ARC? A voluntary product accessibility template is just the standardized template for describing product accessibility that shows compliance with WCAG and Section 508 standards. The ARC is the completed VPAT, providing the transparency on accessibility features and any limitations that a product could present. And the importance toward compliance is that these are both evaluating the claims that a vendor is making about accessibility compliance and also ensuring legal and institutional compliance. From my seat, that also becomes, will a piece of learning technology present a barrier to student learning? And that's something that I need to be able to articulate to a faculty member who comes to me with a challenge that they're trying to use technology to solve. So one of the problems here that we're looking to face is just around the complexity of the technical documentation. VPAT analysis requires specialized knowledge to understand exactly what that's saying. The technical language often obscures what those user barriers could be. And vendors are not necessarily consistent in how they're filling out these forms, especially if we're looking at different tools with the same kind of feature set. If you don't have the formal training, the conformance terms, this is supports, this is partially supports, may also obscure some of those barriers and not be very clear or transparent in what that could present in terms of real-term user impact. So one of the things that we're looking to address here is first, how we can make comparisons more narrative, so that I can say this product is going to introduce this barrier versus this product, which is going to be a better user experience. The lack of ownership, as Kevin mentioned, designated accessibility owners don't necessarily exist inside the procurement process, and the different houses looking at these things from different use cases could present delays or misinterpretation. And there are constraints in terms of university resources and expertise in making these evaluations. So what we're trying to solve with this product is to save time for procurement and tech teams in assessing accessibility at first review, to contextualize what works in a product and what might need attention, and to facilitate comparison between multiple products. Our audience is fairly broad. We're looking to have something that works for procurement teams, for accessibility leads, for instructional designers like me, and for technologists who are needing to see clear vendor accessibility data. And they need to see the first review so that they understand what next steps to pursue. In terms of a role in procurement, we are not looking to provide any kind of authoritative decision-making vehicle. We're looking to support informed human-reviewed decision-making processes, and we're looking for a way to preserve human review to support those enforcements. So the human is always making the choice. The tool that we're developing is just going to provide a first review to help the human make a more informed source a lot faster. So our effective use strategy is just supporting the broader accessibility and procurement strategy rather than replacing any real step in it. So an overview. Our product is called the VPAT Evaluator. It generates plain text summaries of the voluntary product accessibility template, which contextualize the technical documentation into actionable insights for human review. The features that we've developed are using generative AI as that first review term to save time for human oversight. We're generating plain text summaries of technical language. So if you see a report, it'll tell you in plain text what that means. We're going to highlight strengths, but also highlight potential user barriers. And we're producing structured reports to facilitate product exploration. We're aligning with WCAG 2.1 and Section 508 with roadmap for pushing that to 2.2 in the very near future. So the workflow as we've designed it, the user uploads a VPAT, the tool provides a clear report, and the user uses that report to guide decisions and next steps, and really conversations, which is what we found to be the most valuable about this product. anyone who's using it has the baseline understanding to have a conversation about a product and really ask questions that they might not have known to ask if they didn't have that baseline review. All right, so in terms of the app itself, we're using Anthropic's Claude 3.5 as a large language model. And we're using prompts that are structured against documentation as knowledge sources and guardrails. And as we were developing it, that mattered a lot to us. We wanted to make sure that we were using more than just the model's training data. We wanted to give a level of expertise and provide authoritative sources so that the prompts that we're using go against the authoritative standards rather than just what a probability model might expect the next step to be. How this was designed originally was thinking through what kind of questions would an expert ask when reviewing a VPAT that someone without that expertise might not know to ask the first time. So we have a series of prompts that we're analyzing against. The user makes an upload, and on the back end, it starts with scanning for the date of completion. Is that document complete? We're using 18 months as our standard. If this is something that's outdated, it's going to flag it as a place for the human to review. Maybe reach out to the vendor and say, hey, maybe you have something updated that we can review instead. It's evaluating the name of the evaluator. Is that person named and credible? This is trying to see if the VPAT was filled out by someone, say, in a sales role, who might be less credible than an outside third-party source that might be more objective in that review. Then we're looking for the structure, which is just, is this filled out the way an expert would expect? Is the instruction page still there, even though the instructions say that that should be removed? What kind of questions would an expert at first review say, oh, that's a problem that someone without that technical expertise might not know to flag? Then things get interesting, especially from my seat in instructional design. We're looking for thoroughness and accuracy of criteria and providing plain language descriptions of any potential deficiencies and barriers with examples. And those examples are really powerful for me. So if a faculty member comes to me and says, this is really cool tech that I saw at a conference and I want to integrate it into 87 of my courses, I can say that sounds great, but this might present this unintended barrier, and here are the examples of how a student would not be able to interact with your course content if this is the decision that you're making. And that makes a much better real-time conversation. They might not understand what these barriers could be or how they could actually affect their students. And then we look at suggested outcomes and potential next steps based on the authoritative criteria and any concerns. And we're being really, really clear that these are potential next steps and potential outcomes. This is where the human needs to come back into that review process and say, all right, I'm analyzing these, I am asking for follow-ups, I am aligning these with our own institutional policies and priorities, and as a human, I am making the decision about what a next step is gonna look like. Just a quick overview of our tool usage so far, because we're really proud of it. As of this morning, we've got 1,062 requests by 312 users across 193 institutions. I'm going to share some links in a second. We'll hope everyone on this call will take a second and try this out. We are desperately collecting feedback and using that to make improvements for what the next steps in that roadmap are going to look like. Some of those next steps, very soon, Title II alignment. Follow-up questions for vendors was a piece of user feedback from a couple other presentations. We're going to add an additional prompt to this process that after the suggested outcomes, it's going to say, all right, here are, based on these results, the next steps that you could ask to the vendor for follow-up to really facilitate that conversation, again, under the pretense that you don't know to ask what you don't know to ask. So providing some structure for what those follow-ups could look like. Future plans, we're still collecting feedback. We're looking at what future enhancements are going to look like, and we're trying to see what other AI-enhanced accessibility exploration that we could provide and what partners might exist and want to continue some of this work. So with that, we're going to do a quick demo. I will go ahead and copy this link, drop it into the chat here.
Well, Rebecca, while you're getting that up, are there any burning questions that the group has at the moment?
Yes, please. Let's jump in.
There were no questions in chat, but it looks like Claire in the webinar has said that she's used it, which is great.
It's
Fantastic.
very pleasing. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. If anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in, drop it in the chat, or feel free to come at me. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what this looks like. So we start here. We click over to the evaluate. It's going to ask you for a login. We'll get to this in a minute, but right now, as a service that we're providing, every unique user has 6 of these a month. Part of our next steps are actively trying to see if we can bring the cost down on our end and get a little bit more efficient in our prompting, a little bit more efficient in how we're evaluating knowledge sources. And then if we can make that work, potentially raising that limit. But for now, we go here. These are just VPATs I found on the open web, so no concerns about any kind of NDA. We ask that nothing confidential is uploaded to this, but on the back end, we're not saving anything. Sessions clear after the user finishes, so we're not storing any of these in our internal database. And I click evaluate, and I won't watch you. Excuse me, I won't make you watch this whole thing, but it starts with the upload and then it goes through each of those prompts that I identified one by one. And we have it taking its time so it can really think about these. This takes a little bit of time. We ask you to wait about 2 minutes. But when we're finished, and I pulled this up a little earlier, how are we doing? It's going to give us a plain text structure like this, which starts with the summary and recommendations. So this is going to be your first line. I'm going to scan this as the human to see what partial supports exist and create that listing. Then we're going to move on to those prompts that I was describing. So first, what is the document structure? It appears properly formatted. What is the completion date? This one's May 14th of 2024. 21 months old. This is a little bit above that 18-month threshold, so you'd want to ask some follow-ups based on your institutional context. What are the evaluator details? The product owner and Perkins Access was the evaluator here, and it gives you a little bit of context for what that means if you're not familiar. And then we get into thoroughness and accuracy. We've got our narrative, and then potential user barriers. And like I said, this is where, from my seat, I had some really good conversations about where a product could present a barrier that a faculty member might not understand if they're asking to adopt it in early stages of that consultative process. So potential user barriers based on each of these partially. And then we have this available as a PDF readout. So you can take it, use this, have conversations internally about what next steps should look like if this is a product that you want to pursue. This again, we've had conversations about different ways we could structure this, but what we keep coming back to is the narrative explanation is what seems to be the most applicable across institutional contexts. His next steps are where the institutional everything comes back. We care more about this than about an institution down the road that might have a different policy. So I've been struggling to see another way to provide this for multi-institutional use. And with that, I'm really hoping we can just have a conversation about what kind of institutional challenges the audience is facing. Keep talking about what any kind of feedback could be. And otherwise, I think that takes us back.
And I can provide a little bit additional information here. So the original, I guess the beta release of this was last April. We did partner with a handful of institutions to have them try it. We also worked with an accessibility company to provide some feedback. We launched this in July, wide scale, and we've gotten some feedback, and some of those pieces have been implemented in the version that you saw today. We also have a roadmap of a number of other enhancements that we have planned in the near future. But to what Rebecca said is our goal is to keep this as a free service for all institutions. So essentially a .edu email address is all we're asking for. We do restrict it to 6 per individual, but you can have multiple individuals within an institution. There is a cost every time the AI processes the report out. So that's why we haven't made this just wide open to everybody. We've had some conversations with them, some institutions that would like to put 200, 300 plus VPATs through a month. And we are exploring maybe a token-based system for those who want more than what the free version can offer. But there's some other pieces in here that we're exploring about possibly having some open-ended questions that the report provides that you could follow up with the vendor and ask if it's unclear what partial supports means. We can identify that and have those as follow-up questions. Another area is having sort of a community board where we're not storing any of the VPATs and we don't want to get into any type of liability. But if somebody creates an account for their institution and they make themselves available, it does allow others to connect with them across the nation. So if University of Washington uses this and we see that they've shared their account and they've evaluated 3 or 4 different products, you can talk to the contact from U of Washington and see what they've done. Or if it's University of Oregon or Oregon State or whomever. So that's something that we're evaluating to see how we can create more of a community feel within the platform. So hopefully we've generated a couple questions. Or concerns?
All right. So the question, I'm happy to read it. How are vendors taking this feedback? Do they find this sort of evaluation helpful, and are they mostly likely to respond positively? We haven't had any reports back to us of direct contact with vendors. We would not necessarily recommend this is taken and forwarded to a vendor. We're designing to be sort of a user facing, these are my first review and then follow up. So pending as of now, unless you have a different approach, Kevin?
No, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating what Rebecca said on the onset, but I think it's worth repeating. One of the evaluations that the VPAT this tool is doing is it's actually looking at a couple of criteria and just to see if the VPAT itself is a valid response. We're looking at the date that it was last updated, and we're flagging it if it's more than 18 months old. We're also assessing who completed it. And so we're noting whether that was a salesperson or an accessibility expert at the organization. We're also noting if a third-party validation service has done that. We're even checking to see if they've followed directions and moved the first 7 or 8 pages as instructed. All of that goes to part of the score is how trustworthy this is. But to Rebecca's point, this output is meant for the university to use as part, and I stress part, of its evaluation. This tool shouldn't be used for the sole decision making. AI can make mistakes. We've trained this system, but to Kellen's question, we are not using the VPATs uploaded to retrain because we don't want to get into any proprietary data or any type of liability from the vendors, especially if you have to sign an NDA to get the VPAT. So what we're doing is we are giving it very strict guidelines based on WCAG standards and other feedback that we've gotten from our accessibility partners to train it. And we've made some tweaks specifically in anticipation, the 2.1 AA standards changing. I don't know, Rebecca, what did I miss?
Great overview. This is deployed in our department's private AWS instance, and the data privacy exists. So this is not, we've got a walled garden between any kind of user upload in the large language model. It's just working in our private instance, and then nothing is getting stored after that. So we're confident in that side, and that's really mattered to us for all the reasons. All of the tweaks and implementation we've been using are mostly at the prompt level, just to make sure that the output is consistent. We've run the same VPAT through multiple times to make sure that it's giving the same consistent results every time the narrative is baseline the same. One of the interesting use cases that came back that we're still working to integrate into the next version we're going to release is about, how do I phrase this? Confidence in how the vendor has filled out the documentation. So we were assuming a level of positive intent, which I think is still important, but we weren't considering the kind of use case where a vendor could say, this is perfect, this is all right, everything exists exactly the way it should, when that might not necessarily be the case in terms of real user testing. So we were spending more time with interpreting potential deficiencies that a vendor transparently shared rather than something they might be trying to obscure for reasons. So our next iteration of some of these prompts are, if there is no area of concern, some of the vendor feedback could be asking about how those claims were supported by user testing, and sort of providing the individual with the kind of questions that could surface any potential obscurity, I think would be a nice way to say that.
And I'll just loop back to the vendor piece about information being stored. At least here in Florida, we have a heavy predominance of Instructure Canvas as our learning management system. And they do sort of a constant update approach. And their VPAT documentation does not follow suit to their updates. So we would hate to train the model on a point-in-time VPAT that really doesn't reflect the current functionality or infrastructure. So that is one of the challenges that we have, is vendors that have constant updates and don't have a defined VPAT for every version or version control. It is hard to say that a 1.2 VPAT, from the vendor matches up with a 1.28 version. Other questions?
And while people are coming up with those, I want to throw back to the feedback. At the bottom of the tool, there is a little feedback survey that comes directly to my inbox that I get very excited when feedback comes in. Those are directly influencing exactly what our next steps are going to look like. So if anyone has tried this, we'd love to know what that experience has been, both positive and negative. Again, we don't know what we don't know. So if there are any specific use cases or weird institutional quirks that you'd like to share, that's only going to help us in our next iterative roadmap.
And we can share that, one of the requests that we've had in the past has been around a scoring mechanism. And the challenge that we had is that the different institutions that requested or wanted us to evaluate some type of scoring mechanism on the VPAT all had different scoring weights. So some wanted to weight certain criterion within the VPAT higher than others, like keyboard navigation. Others wanted to score on the VPAT as a whole. And the challenge with doing a score is that, again, assuming good intent by the vendor, depending about the quality of their response and what disabilities may be impacted by that, it's really hard to quantify a score. So we opted to stay with the narrative piece on that.
I just had to add my qualitative data. I'm from an English background. Qualitative always wins, which upsets some of my instructional design colleagues.
If there's no questions in chat, I was going to ask mine so I don't have to put it in chat.
Yes, please.
Regarding the VPAT evaluator, it looks like for now it's generating the report so that you can then read through and see how it evaluates the vendor. However, I was wondering whether there has been any requests for, or if there might be possible like future iterations of um, engagement with the report, maybe like asking for clarification or explanations of certain sections, similar to like Notebook LM, where you have the ability to interact with the generated content. Don't know if there's any, discussion around that, but, especially for those who maybe aren't experts in the language or maybe not as familiar. I know it's doing the explanation, but the ability to be able to kind of engage with the content would be another like great step.
We had that in actually our original version, and just to be transparent, we used, was it ChatGPT or Copilot? It was ChatGPT to do our prototyping, and we had it where you could really have a robust conversation with the GPT bot. The challenge is that when we make that available to 190 plus institutions with over 1,000 submissions to date, it got very costly to support the ongoing conversation. So in order to make the tool free for everybody, we had to cut the conversation piece down and just essentially produce the report. So our focus has been trying to make the report more useful, more robust, and including a newer section coming at some point in time about questions to follow up with the vendor. If there are things that you think of that you think could be put in the report that would perhaps anticipate what a Q&A back with the chatbot would be, would love to include those and make that free as for everyone.
And honestly, this seems really simple, but it hasn't occurred to me until just now. Kevin, if this is a bad idea, this is your chance to jump on it. But I can't see any reason why a user couldn't upload that PDF to the large language model of their choice and have a conversation about it.
It would be, I guess I would make the recommendation for each institution to see what their university policy is. If you have like a campus edition of Copilot that is a walled garden, I think it's safer to make sure that you're not adding the vendor's information to a database or a model that they don't want. That would be my only hesitation in saying, go to the free version of ChatGPT and upload it.
Data privacy, walled garden, etc. Question in the chat: have you had vendors use the tool to evaluate their own VPATs? Not as far as we know so far.
We did have a vendor that was a partner with us. So MicroAssist is a company out of Houston, Texas, that is an accessibility service provider, and it's part of their DNA to do this type of work. And they validated this. We've also had EDUCAUSE, One Ed Tech look at this, and they've validated the results. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't always do better. But it is an interesting question on whether or not we want vendors to know that we're doing this. Other comments or questions?
Going back to sage advice from the chat, don't upload to the free version of any Gen AI tool, which I would like on a t-shirt tomorrow now. Thank you.
I will add there. I did mention the organization One Ed Tech. It used to be called IMS Global. They do have a vendor volunteer accessibility effort where vendors can submit profiles to One Ed Tech to be evaluated. So it's a voluntary process. But it's a relatively small database at this point in time, but it is growing. So this is another area just to take a look at it. Unfortunately, if your institution isn't a member, you don't have full access to the entirety. But if you do have perhaps either consortial access or your system access, somebody can provide that information. But this is just an initiative to keep an eye on.
So in asking my question about vendor access, part of me was thinking, well, if we're assuming good positive intent and they want to make their VPATs better, maybe it would be really helpful for them. And I don't know, would we hide that we're using the tool on their product? But then the other part of me is like, well, maybe this is a funding model that you could consider that vendors could pay for access to help sustain the project.
Yeah, that's interesting. Whether the OneEdTech database is something that vendors will want to go to versus something that's university run, I'm not quite sure. It's an interesting conversation. It does lead us to having maybe a conversation with a trusted partner that's a vendor and seeing what the reaction is to this. Just if there's other conversations or I know that we're specifically talking about this AI tool for VPAT evaluation, but if there are other questions that we can answer, we're happy to try.
One of what's been fun about this project is it's fundamentally really simple, which is a nice way to start integrating Gen AI into our workflows because we understand exactly what's happening. We understand enough of the variables to make sure that it's consistent. And it's given us some of the parameters for evaluating other AI projects just to see what does consistent output look like? What are the markers that we're looking for? Where does deviation present a concern versus a shift in narrative that could be expected? It's been a fun conversation just from that perspective.
And to that point, we are exploring, and I guess I want to emphasize exploring, because we're not ready for prime time yet, a couple other accessibility tools that if we can get them working right and consistent, we would be open to sharing those as well. One of them goes through a course and identifies all of the media objects within it, specifically videos, and then it'll try to evaluate whether closed captioning exists and whether it exists within a YouTube format, with Vimeo, native to the LMS, whatever the case may be. And if it can validate that closed captioning exists, it will try to pull the transcript from the video and then it'll do an assessment. So the AI will go through and analyze the video, create its own transcript, measure its outcome against what it pulled from the video platform, and do a accuracy score. So it is a huge time saver for us, where normally we would have students having to click through every page of a course to see where a video exists and then watch the video to see if closed captioning and then do an assessment on accuracy. So what may have taken hours is now a task that's done in 5 minutes with regular consistency, but it's not perfect. So that is one project we're looking at. We're also looking at another one about remediating PDFs. And I will share that we have successes and we have failures. The PDF remediation has done great at restructuring the PDF and making sure that headers are present and restructuring tables. Unfortunately, what it's doing for images is it's replacing the images with alt text. The alt text is correct, but it's just flat out removing the images. So that is a work in progress among other things that we're looking at creating.
Technical exploration.
If folks have ideas for accessibility needs that can be addressed through AI, we're certainly open to exploring those. We know that Arizona State University has an incredible tool for assessing complex images and giving alt text as well as long form descriptions. So we know that there are other great tools out there publicly available that are helping accessibility.
That's a great question. So the technical expertise needed to create this kind of AI projects. When Kevin opened, we've been really lucky that from our vice provost, we had the charge of operational efficiency, which is wonderfully big, which was basically the excuse to try out a whole bunch of AI tools for the places that we have bottlenecks in our internal processes. So from the ID seat, I'm working with faculty to integrate AI into aspects of teaching and learning. We're having those kind of authentic assessment conversations. But from my seat, I got the chance to just sit and experiment in ways that have been really interesting. So the technical expertise to create the actual project, after we had a prototype, this went into our brilliant coding lab downstairs, and they built out the back end that is actually doing this in a secure AWS environment. So we had coding expertise, but I would say that the expertise in prototyping was just finding problems that AI can solve. And I'm going to guess in this room, there are experts who understand where accessibility bottlenecks hid in your individual workflows. If we can keep having the community conversations just surfacing where those bottlenecks exist, then anyone who's exploring just, I'm going to sit and mess with custom GPTs for 3 hours between 2 meetings and see if something works. And Kevin, 80% of the time is failing right now, probably, but the 20% of the time is really fun. So it's less expertise from the prototype side on the AI and just sort of trying and trying and trying and trying and being okay with it not working, because when it does work, the efficiency is sort of dramatic. So that's a very long answer to say the experts in what you do in the daily life is going to be where the problems are identified. And then to prototype a solution just takes persistence and being okay with failing.
Well, I'll add on to that is that when we started this project about 1.5 years ago, AI prompting skills were a must, and being very specific and very linear in what we wanted was extremely important, and there was a lot of trial and error, as Rebecca mentioned. Fast forward today, you may have heard the term vibe coding, and there are platforms like AI Studio by Google that really allow a narrative form, and you don't have to be precise with your prompt engineering. And they will develop, I want to say, lightweight source code for an application. So you can build a real prototype that will basically model what you're looking for. Is it production ready? Probably not. But if you have a university or college license to ChatGPT or Google Suite or to Microsoft Copilot, each one of those platforms has the ability to host GPTs that you can use across your university. So you could take the code or ask IT support to take the code and then redistribute it within whatever your university platform is. So it's getting easier to deploy these and to sort of think about it. So if you have a vision, you can have a conversation with generative AI in these newer tools and start developing things. So from my perspective, I think it's having the vision and understanding what the problem you're trying to solve and being able to articulate that and have a conversation, because AI is not going to get it right the first time. For us, because we wanted to make this public beyond just our university walls, we really needed to make sure that we had a secure infrastructure within the cloud to serve all institutions, not just within Microsoft Copilot, for example.
Some questions in the chat, Kevin, about like next steps for some of these products. Right now on the feedback form, if anyone is able to try this tool out, we've got a little line that asks if you'd like to join conversations about AI enhanced accessibility products. you'd like to add your email there. We haven't taken that into what next steps look like. We have that's sort of a Kevin question. Where do you see the larger community expanding to support this kind of project?
Well, with this particular project, the VPAT Evaluator, we are hoping that as many institutions that can use it, provide feedback and help it and help us enhance it year over year. Unless we get feedback from folks or folks identify risks, challenges like malintent by a vendor and falsifying information, we're not going to be able to accommodate or at least train for that particular situation. So the more you use it, the more you try to break it, the better for us. For the other tools, I'm going to just be honest, we have a longer road to go with the PDF remediation piece. That is I think it's a unicorn in some ways to try to fix Adobe. Generally, we try to output to HTML wherever possible and avoid the PDF format. But we're still working on that. I think that the media one is probably closer to some type of release. I know there was a question about where is a forum to go. I'm going to throw, this isn't a great answer. EDUCAUSE has a wonderful AI listserv, but we have been running a teaching and learning with AI conference in Orlando for the last 3+ years, and it's coming up in June. We had 900 attendees last year. So we have folks from across the globe who come. Now, granted, the focus is on the teaching and learning aspect, not necessarily back office or accessibility, but that doesn't mean that we can't have an accessibility wing that gets developed off of this conference.
And
I don't
at
know.
least one really great accessibility presentation last year on using tools for Canvas remediation.
I would also encourage all of you, if you're connected to groups like AHEAD, to have them have AI tracks specific to this and recruit folks to come in who are building tools and try to build a community around that. We just met, Rebecca, remind me some of the schools that we've recently had conversations who are developing their own tools.
Michigan State, I believe.
I'm sorry?
Central Michigan, was that?
Central Missouri was most recent, but we also had College of the Mines. We've also had, was it Penn State?
To find my list, but some good conversations that are mostly coming out of people using this and wanting to talk. But a lot of people are getting around the challenges that we're facing by just developing some of their internal, which is more helpful for those. This is like really specific institutional use case. But what's been nice about those conversations is when we're hearing their internal challenges, we can think how that exists at sort of the global level and adding some of our tweaks to our process.
Yeah, unfortunately, our conference is in person just because Orlando, for some, is a destination, and last year's was right outside the entrance of Universal Studios. This year, we're right around the corner from Disney, so